Hello, I'm Svitek, 360 Creative Coach, and welcome to my vlog, where it is both my mission and my pleasure to highlight my creative journey in hopes of inspiring you, giving you specific takeaway. All that way, your journey can be at least a little bit easier. Now, before I fully get into things, I would like to take the opportunity to invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. That way you get all the various lessons and episodes that I put out right when I put them out. Thank you if you just did, and thank you if you already were. It truly does mean a lot to me, as I hope it does to you. Which, by the way, at this point, there's literally over 1,500 episodes that I've done that each of them, has something to offer for everybody, right? Not all 1,500 will be of benefit to you, but I think the nice part is you can pick and choose which ones you feel apply to you. And that's why I run the gamut. It's also kind of why I call myself the 360 Creative Coach, because there's so many aspects that I do cover that are beneficial for creatives and so forth. The overarching theme of this vlog really is the idea of turning pain into purpose. I think that's a good summation because, a lot of times we all deal with various shit in our lives, and that can be both our professional lives as well as our personal lives. And the reason I call myself a 360 creative coach is because, I think there's a lot of artists out there who focus on just bettering their art without also, focusing on their personal life, which part of that is their mental fortitude, right? Through therapy, meditation, friendships and so forth, just all those aspects of just life. And by not, making those a priority, they end up crumbling. And for me, I've certainly been in those situations, which is why I know the importance of that. And that's why, for me, the pain of having gone through that, I have found as purpose to, share with you and others to not have it be that way for you, so you can avoid the mistakes that I have, right? And I think that's the ideal for a lot of us, right? I mean, I stand on the shoulders of giants that have come before me, that have turned their pain into purpose, and whether it's podcasts, books, movies, both nonfiction and narrative and yada, 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 right? Or just individual conversations, all of that stuff helps, right? We all need people, and I use the word people in that broad sense, as I mentioned, to encompass all of this, to help guide us on our path, and purpose in this sense allows us to be then solution oriented, because it gives us that perspective. And I think, on a larger scale, ultimately, I think what upsets me about a lot of self-help quote unquote movements is that they normalize narcissistic and ego tendencies, when the real purpose of any spiritual path, and that can also be religion and so forth, is to help heal others. By healing yourself. By healing yourself, you help heal the whole, and you can be there for other people, as opposed to, a lot of people use it as a way to shun the world away, and I don't think that's the purpose. And so, in that way, I want to utilize my hardships and my journey for a benefit to you, for the purpose, right? And let me just kind of start with a story that one of my mentors used to tell me, that I think kind of encapsulates the frustration for a lot of people, while also offering some hope. It's a very weird story, but let me tell it to you, right? So, there's this guy, and he's driving on the highway, and a couple of mob guys pull him over, right? And they tell him, get out of the car right now. And they draw a circle into the sand, and they're like, stay in this circle, right? And so he's in the circle, and while he's standing in the circle, they all of a sudden, they're taking a bat and stuff like that to his car and just destroying it, making a mess of it, right? And after like just beating it to shit, essentially, they turn to him and he's laughing. And they're like, what the hell? What the hell's wrong with you? Why are you laughing? We just destroyed your car. And he's laughing, and it says, because while you guys were doing that, I stepped outside of the circle 3 times. And, the reason why this sort of resonates in the way that it does for me and why I chose to highlight it is because I think a lot of modern day life can feel very restrictive. We don't get enough time to work on our creative projects. We're oftentimes overworked, trying to make ends meet. We don't get to spend time with friends and family, things of that nature. And, the joy, we need to essentially find the joy in very small things, AKA, stepping outside the circle 3 times, which can seem rather depressing. And certainly that's not what I'm proposing as the solution. But I think, I guess I highlight it as a step towards that direction because, unfortunately, I do know many people that are stifled by every day. Like, it can be a tough world out there, and I'm very grateful for the things that I have in my life. And, even so, like, there's hardships along the way, and it can feel very conflated to speak about those when I have friends, just even in the past weeks that have been laid off, that are going through health issues and, things of that nature. But, number one, I think, to do a pain comparison is not healthy for anybody, because I'll highlight kind of the things that I've been dealing with, but it's not like, that my frustrations are any more or less valid than theirs. And furthermore, as I said, part of everything is to highlight that pain and turn it into purpose. So for me, with the stuff that I'm going to talk about, I'm finding ways to be solution oriented, and also, by being able to recognize various things, I can have and maintain an overall joyous state, aka step outside of the circle, and utilize my stepping outside the circle, if you will, to help benefit others. With the people that I know in my life that are dealing with very, very big things. Because I'm not in that position and don't have that stress, I'm able to take a bird's eye view and really help them navigate beyond like, hey, it'll be okay. Like, no, trying to create action steps with them, so it's not just me dictating stuff, but also, doing what I can to be a benefit to them. And again, that's what I think the real purpose of all of self-help is, so that way we can be there as a collective to help each other and pick each other up in those moments. And that's why, if I was down and sad, that benefits nobody. I do the individualistic improvements so that way I can be there for other people. And, that's the real point of all of this. So, when I talk about my frustrations that I've been hinting at, just in this past couple weeks, really, it's just been a lot of work, and just expectations and so forth, in a way that hasn't been the case. And, there's things that I identify that I allowed to happen to get in that position. And also people just took advantage and things of that nature. And, not that they were ill-intentioned, but, it just kind of culminated into a lot of work, right? And so, I joked with my friends, rather than this be like the origin story of me becoming the Grinch during the holidays, I was like, okay, I'm going to utilize that moving forward. One of the steps for the new year that I took was, with people that I work with on a side basis, so not my primary work, I've created blackout dates for. So, I did an episode about this, but essentially what it is, these are the dates that I essentially am unavailable. And, we can create solutions where we pre-tape, pre-edit, I can find a fill-in and all that. So you're not hung out to dry, but I personally will be unavailable, even if it's an emergency, right? Like, I think, we conflate what an emergency actually is, but even if it is the worst emergency, I'm just, I think we have to have the trust that people can handle it, because most times they can, right? And so, that was a step forward that I took. I also, at my primary job, I requested with the people that I work with, I said, hey, for Fridays, is it possible to avoid recordings, And this is an aspect that I know I can't enforce. I can't, ultimately, enact this, but, these are good people that I work with. And I said, I would really like to, this year, as I kind of highlighted to them, it's almost like a maker versus manager thing for me. And, having just recordings off the table on Friday will allow me to really catch up, and do a lot of work. So if possible, let's take that off, if we can take that off the table. And they were very agreeable, which is great. And I also said to them, listen, I get it. There's certain guests that Fridays, a lot of times for people, it's like the chill day. So most, for them, doing a podcast recording on a Friday feels like the natural day. And if it's completely unavoidable, then yes, I understand, completely, put it on the books, but even if it just alleviates some of that, then great, I think that helps. And so they understood, and they were very accepting of that fact. So, just again, rather than be frustrated and take it out on people, rather than say the wrong thing to the people that I work with, it was very much okay, what is the frustration? What is the root of the frustration, and what can be done to help that? Another aspect sort of being, this past week I filled in for a coworker, and in many ways I was set up for failure. I really was. But as frustrating as it was, I now look back on that experience and I can look at it of okay, well, what's the purpose in this? And for me, after all, one of my greatest geniuses is problem solving and also creating systems and so forth, right? And that, when I talk about problem solving, one of the tools to fix a problem for me is always creating better systems. And so, through this, rather than just vent to my company of what the hell, X, Y, and Z, I can look to, okay, why don't we highlight the various issues, so we'll list the issue, and here's my suggested solutions that still accomplish the goal of what we're trying to accomplish, right? I think that's a key component. I'm not making it about me and being here's the issue, and, moving forward, I won't do this. And it's that doesn't still get the job done, right? So very much keeping in mind, okay, what is the overall goal and the mission of, the project, and how can we do all these things to just make it a better experience for everybody, right? And so, that's kind of how I've been approaching it in that way. And we'll see how it's received. We'll see how ultimately it gets enacted. But in that way, I also have the ability to then, if I ever, one of the things I will say, if I'm ever to fill in for this show, I'm simply not going to unless some of these things get addressed, because it's untenable, it's unsustainable, and I just won't. So I'm going to be drawing a boundary in that way. We'll see how they respond to that, but it's certainly, I'm willing to fall on that sword, if you will, right? Especially, again, I kind of have to really sit with and really write what I need to write in the correct way. And the correct way being taking any emotion out of it and really just, again, turning any pain I have into purpose, to be of benefit to the company ultimately, right? Because if I just make it, and that was the worst thing about in these past weeks, it's been, I haven't been able to process essentially like the end of the year and really enjoy it. And then you're kind of tossed into the new year. And, of course, then it's like, okay, here's the new year. Everyone wants, we all strive to have like our New Year's resolutions and like make adjustments. And this year kind of already just the stress level, the sleep patterns and things of that nature have been like tossed aside. So it's not the ideal start to the year. But again, I know I can adjust, and the best way of doing it was just to get through it, right? But yeah, I noticed those tendencies in me of, going towards negativity when I know better. And, that was sort of my biggest frustration. That's why I want to really kind of just take a moment to, sit with what I'm going to write to my company. So that way, again, it's not complaining, but it is of benefit, right? Which one of the things, kind of just in the past weeks, has like stood out from a lot of people, right? Is this idea of like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And the reason that frustrates the hell out of me, as I realized, is because the idea of don't worry about it essentially means that I don't have to do it, right? Like at its core, if that's what, that's what it should mean. Like, don't worry about it. But if I have to do something, that means technically I do have to worry about it. And so telling someone don't worry about it when they in fact do have to worry about it is the equivalent of saying like to a depressed person, like, oh, don't worry, it gets better. Of like, this will pass, blah, blah. And it's like, that doesn't help in that moment. And I think when we talk about just working on ourselves in general, I think that's a big part of it is like most people just don't even know how to communicate because we're so detached from that idea. And we try to be helpful, right? Like it's not that it's coming from a bad place, but unfortunately it is just like one of the worst things that you could say because of course, like, for example, this show that I'm filling in for, it is the most demanding show, very specific show. And if in that way I didn't worry about it, it's not like they would just accept it. They would give me a ton of notes back and be like, this all needs to be fixed. So I do, in fact, have to worry about it. And that's the aspect that, I think that's the frustrating aspect of it when someone says, don't worry about it. It's like, but you do want me to worry about it because I have to get it done. So that's, something that I sort of identified and called BS on, in that way of like, no, and it's always interesting because, I think part of the adjustment for people in my life, even just like various, like friends, for example, I think they've gotten used to X, Y, and Z from me, but as I continue to evolve, I have certain standards that I need, like nowadays, if someone wants me to do something, I need a lot more info than I would have in the past because number one, my time is becoming so much more limited. And so the things that I say yes to versus the things that I say no to, like I have to be very specific and adjust my schedule accordingly and so forth. And, it's been interesting to, see people and they've been like, okay, well, I don't know this answer. I don't know. Like, I just need a yes or no. And it's like, and, for me, it's very much like, I can't give you a yes or no until I know these things. And if you can't give me those things, then unfortunately by default, it's going to be a no again, that's where like the idea of like, don't worry about it comes in. Cause let's say, it's some sort of film shoot, right? So, I'll be like, okay, well, where is it? What do I need to bring? Stuff like that. And it's like, oh, well, it's at 7 and, just bring your camera and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, okay, what are we filming? Number one, because that'll dictate, do I also need lavs? Do I need, just like at the end of the day, the reason I'm asking these questions is not just for me, but it's so that way I meet your expectations, right? In that way. And, saying it's at 7 p.m., like that doesn't help, because it could be, I live in LA and all of a sudden, let's say it's in San Francisco. Like what? Then I have to count for like essentially a 6-7 hour drive just to get to San Francisco and back and blah, blah, blah. Also, just in general, I also tell, like how and when do you want the footage? Because, with my camera, the footage is huge. So, all that stuff, like essentially. And yeah, I ask these things because I want the experience for everybody to be as smooth as possible. And, a lot of people in that way can have a very laissez-faire aspect of it. And part of that is in the past, it didn't matter to me because we could all figure it out. And after the fact, and, it was like, okay, cool, here's what we need now. And then it would require me to do X, Y, and Z. But I could do that because I had the time. Now it's like, again, I need to account for that. So if you need me to do stuff with the footage, it's not just 2 hours of filming. Now it's also, I got to account for X, Y, and Z, of conversion, uploads, transfers, whatever the case may be, in that way. And so, ultimately I need to know for myself, but also so I can do it correctly for you, sort of a thing. And, I think that's been a big shift in my life. And, I think it's not irked people, but yeah, I think people are used to a certain way of working. But that doesn't mean, again, for me, as I continue to upgrade, let's say, these are things that I'm sticking by. And again, ultimately the benefit is for everybody, not just for me. That's what's kind of so interesting about it. So that covers primarily the pain into purpose of what I want to really highlight and so forth. But I also want to kind of touch upon other areas that don't quite deal with that necessarily, but this first one perhaps does, and that's to kind of give you an update that, if you haven't been following me on social media, that before the end of the year, my dog Chloe, I had to make a decision, and unfortunately, she is no longer with us. It's kind of been interesting because, whenever I've done the videos of these episodes, she's kind of been a staple and always like walks in the background, and I've kind of seen the, footage of her in that way, and it'll be interesting, as time goes by, that's just not going to be an ever-present thing. And the reason I raise that is because, I know a lot of people do have pets, and they mean a lot to them. And, certainly for me, so I had Chloe and Sparky, and Sparky passed away in 2020. And for a long time afterwards, obviously, it was just me and Chloe, in that way. And, I talked about it in 2021. She had just a bad neck and couldn't really move properly in the way. And then through a miracle, essentially, she returned back to normal, which I never thought would have been possible. And then, so we got like another year and a half, essentially. But, what had happened was she started having seizures. And, at first we did the things we could as far as medication and procedure. And that tamed it for a little bit, but it just got to be too much. She was having like 12 seizures a day. And, the difficult aspect of it was, in many ways I knew that she could kind of continue, and push forward in that way. But I was like, to what end? Like, for what purpose? It's just painful for her. She's disoriented. She doesn't know. And, So I made that painful decision to, essentially say, this isn't worth it for you. And that's tough, it's a painful decision. I'm grateful. One of the things I realized was, for me, it's never been a choice. They always ask you, do you want to be in the room as they're euthanized or not? And for me, it's never really a choice. Like, for me, I'm always going to be in there because, whatever animal it is, I want them to know that they were loved right up until that final moment. And I understand it's a very painful thing, and so some people prefer not to, to each their own. But for me, it's not a choice. But I had realized I'd never done it alone. When Sparky passed, it was technically me and Chloe that provided safe passage to him, and I'd never done it alone. And I've, for better or worse, been at a lot of animals' end of life. There's Buzz and Sparky, Boomer, all these various animals. So I had asked, one of my friends to show up, and she brought another dear friend of mine who's actually allergic to animals, but just shows you how much he knew that this meant to me, and so I'm very grateful for that. And it's interesting, because, I think in many ways, it's a very sad thought to think about. It was a painful decision. It was a painful moment for sure. But in many ways, I spent that day and I essentially processed it, right? Like, I took the time to really grieve and look back on everything that we had. And then that was kind of, not that it was it, and not that, like, there's not a readjustment period, within my apartment and so forth, and not having her. But, I look at all the stuff that I've done, and, it's just kind of interesting where, of course, I'd love to have her with me still. But I also look at it, I don't know, I just, there's so many things to life that I can't explain. And so, maybe I'm a fool, but I like to believe, like, there was no in-between of her passing from my arms and, being reunited with Sparky, who she loved, and then playing, right? And so for her, the pain is over. If anything, I'm the one left with the pain and the grief, right? And it's kind of interesting because all love stories end in tragedy, right? And I use the term loosely, but of course, even a couple that's, let's say in the traditional romantic sense, married for, their whole lifetime, eventually one of them dies, leaving the other, and that's why, like, many people say, we prefer to die at the same time, sort of thing. So it's not painful for either one of us, but, in this sense, loss of a pet, that is the end of a tragedy. Love story there. Friendships fade, even if you don't become enemies, right? Like, just, all love stories in that way end in a tragedy. But I think that the term tragedy oftentimes can take on this more dark and sad meaning than it really needs to. Of course, like grieve, but I think, for me, Chloe was a dog that always sort of lived in the present and, was so joyous and so forth. And so that's the legacy that she leaves behind. And, it's just a reminder again that our time on this earth is limited, and to make the most of it in that way, because we're not all going to be here forever, and neither are people, and we don't know when the bell tolls for all of us. Which the dual nature of that thought then makes the moments that you do have more enjoyable, because you know how precious they are. So, that's kind of been a lesson for me for all of this. And I think, I'm not quite, like, for me, I'm not ready to take on another dog yet, not because I wouldn't want to, but I think, as I look at things, I think there's something bigger at play. And for me, I want to, foster, I can dog sit for friends because I know the cost and the stress associated with that. And, that'd be fun for me. And then eventually, I don't know, I'd like certainly taking care of 2 dogs for a number of years, essentially by myself in this apartment. That was quite a lot. And, whatever sort of animal that I would want, I would want like kind of just a partner and help with, essentially. Because then it's like we would be like collectively building something together, and, it would have, we would be able to support each other in that way. Rather than just, because it's a lot, to care for things, and that whether it's an animal, certainly people who are caretakers to family members at whatever age they may be, can relate to that. Like, yeah, it can be a lot, but, we must enjoy the moments we all have with each other and so forth, because nothing's guaranteed, unfortunately. So, the next thing, this is kind of completely separate of anything that I've talked about thus far, but I got to thinking a lot about networking, right? It's always been a topic that's been interesting to me because I think many people conflate what networking really is. And, it's this idea of like, oh, you go out to events and you schmooze and whatever, and then you'll get a job and blah, blah, blah. Number one, I've always been a firm believer, like the best way to really network is to do the work, versus anything else. Like that's what ultimately people would be wanting you to do, is to do the work. And so like talking about doing the work isn't the same as actually having work. But it's interesting, and in that way, I kind of then thought about Tim Ferriss has this notion of just-in-case knowledge versus just-in-time knowledge. And just-in-case knowledge is this idea that like you're learning and trying to accumulate this wealth of information because someday you might need it. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but in many ways it can be a wasted effort. Just-in-time knowledge is, information that you learn when you need to. So, like there's various aspects that I know I'm very curious on and would love to utilize. Like I have a basic understanding of X, Y, and Z, and people try to be of benefit to me and throw me like articles on X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, I'm not at that stage yet. For example, with this new project that I'm working on, it's a film project, and I really want it to be a Web3 project, where it has an NFT component to it, and really build a community around it. And my theory for a lot of it is, well, what if you made the NFT project like something people would actually want? Like I think people are turned off by NFTs and Web3 in general because they think like there's a lack of quality. And I was like, well, what if you actually put in the effort and made something good, and were able to attract an audience to that and made it worthwhile? So that's kind of been the crux of what I've been working towards. And, when I always identified that as a goal, people then, again, in a way to try to be beneficial and, nothing against them, but they would send me like, you have to read this, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I appreciate it. And, I stored it in like, a collective document. And I was like, I'll turn to this when the time is needed. Because first, for me, it was like, okay, nothing happens without what is the story, and really getting to the crux of that. Like that to me is the primary thing, that the foundation of which everything from then is built upon. And, I will get to the other stuff as I need to, right? And I understand, like one of the good things that I always understand is the flow that something needs to take in order to happen, and when the right moments to trigger those things are, right? When to initiate them and start them. So, that's always been a big thing for me. And in that way, I kind of look at networking as an example of just in case versus just in time. So the idea of, like the traditional side of networking, of going out to a bar and like being like, hey, I'm Phil, blah, 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 what do you do and what do you do? Is very much like just in case. And therefore it feels like a waste of time, like networking for networking's sake, which a lot of people do, of just like this constant rotation of, multiple days a week of like, hey, thinking that's what's going to get them ahead, versus, just in time is like the work and doing it, and then like when you do get invited to a friend's birthday party and stuff like that, or whatever the case may be, game night, I don't know, whatever, then it's meaningful, and then you actually can talk about it meaningfully as opposed to just this conflated thing. So I don't know, that's kind of the way I've been looking at it in general. But overall, the notion of networking, I think that the best way to really network is to have a showcase of work that you are able to, that you do and work on a consistent basis over time, and it doesn't mean you have to like, have this insane amount, but just slowly chip away at it over time on a consistent basis. And then that's what people respect, so, and that's been my experience of it. Anyway, another aspect of the industry that, kind of makes me laugh, and I was thinking about this because, I'm working on a lot of podcasts, and oftentimes podcasters interview other podcasters, and for some reason, the question or somehow the topic always comes up of, that they started their podcast, and someone will say, yeah, I got into podcasting like 4 or 5 years ago when, no one was really doing it, and it felt like such a great medium to tap into. And I laugh about that because now people think everyone's in podcasting, as opposed to 4 or 5 years ago. And so a couple of things. Number one, now a lot of people who would consider doing a podcast don't sometimes, because the idea of like, oh, everyone's doing a podcast. And first off, that's bullshit. Not everyone is doing a podcast, number one. Number two, who cares if everyone is doing a podcast? It's like saying, oh, well, there's been musicians, people have written books. Oh, you know what? No movie should ever be made because movies have already been made. It's like, no, you can have more of this stuff out there. Like, it doesn't ultimately detract. It doesn't have to be, this idea of a zero-sum game. So I think that's aspect number one. Number two, the reason I bring it up, because it's interesting how little people sort of know about various industries that they get into, right? And that's why ultimately I do laugh of the idea of like, oh, 4 or 5 years ago when no one was doing it. It's like, you don't know the history of podcasting, right? And because I got into it around 2011, give or take, and even then it was like, there was people doing podcasting, and then I could stand on the shoulders of those people and, build off of what they learned and did and so forth. So I think it's not that I'm frustrated or irked by it, but it's like respect the industry. And I say that because, for me, as I kind of made mention, I am wanting to do an NFT project and think I can do something really cool with it, right? Not just like this craze and jumping on a fad, but I think there's, something creative that I can put behind it and use it as a vehicle to express what I'm trying to do and build a community around that. No different than like, people love Star Wars and they buy toys and books and stuff like that, right? And so, for me, to enter into that space meaningfully means to understand and respect that industry. I'm at a very early inflection point of this, but I also know that it's not like I'm the first one to think of an NFT project for a film. And so, to claim that as a thing would be ridiculous. It would be untrue, and it'd be hugely disrespectful. And yes, the NFT excuse me, like, I don't know the timeline of things. Maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years before it really becomes mainstream. I mean, finally, like, podcasts now, or like now you can consider them pretty much mainstream, but it took a good 10, 15 years to get to that point. I think NFTs could be a little bit faster, but I won't make that prediction like as a this is it sort of thing. Regardless, it's going to take time. And so relative to that, I'm at a very early point. However, again, there's a whole history to it. And for me to integrate and properly build my project, I have to know that side of it, so that way I can build upon it and not just ruffle feathers, or that if I do, that it's with a purpose rather than unintentional. So I think, beyond the real lesson of this is not just about like podcasts or whatever. It's, always, if whatever sort of medium you're entering into, really look at it and study it, because that's important. And that's part of, you could tie that back into like the just-in-time knowledge. Now I'm entering this phase of it, and so I need to know these various things, and so I'm learning about those things. No different than like, the film itself, I want to be animated, right? And I've always been a fan of animation. But now I have to really up that, and, and I have been, okay, what's the process? What are the different, modes of working, and the different styles of animation, and, why pick this one over the other, right? So it's all these things that have to factor into it, because, I think it's not just about respect, but also then it creates a better product in the end, right? And I hate to use that word when it comes to creative stuff, but you get what I'm saying in that way. So it's very interesting to me in that way, and I think, again, whatever you're sort of entering, having that reverence for, so that way you don't get yourself in trouble and things of that nature. It's no different than if you were writing a story about World War II, you would kind of want to be as researched as you could about those various aspects of World War II, right? So anyway, there you go. The other sort of aspect to me that I was thinking about over the break, the story that I've been kind of hinting at, that I'm working on, is very much a fantasy story. And as part of that, I've been studying just fantasy in general, right? And Lord of the Rings is certainly one of the most successful stories of all of this. And so I was rewatching the movies, but I watched the theatrical versions, because for a long time I'd watched the extended editions. And you know what? It made me really fall in love with the movies again, because I had watched the extended editions for so long. And I think in many ways those were the ones that like I grew up with, rather than the theatrical versions, because my friends were always so big into Lord of the Rings, and that's what we kind of watched. And I didn't really see them. I think I saw The Two Towers in theaters, but I didn't see Fellowship or The Return of the King in theaters. Not that I wouldn't have wanted to, it's just, a different time of my life. But anyway, the point being, that's what I kind of grew up on, and I never really latched onto it in the proper way. And part of it was I didn't, now that I know storytelling and so forth, and like I have a different appreciation for what Tolkien and, by extension, Peter Jackson and his team did to bring that to life. But in watching the Lord of the Rings, the theatrical version, it got me thinking, like, artists need brevity. The reason why the theatrical versions work to me is because there's a pace to it. There's a reason why from this version, the scenes that are in the extended version or whatever, they were cut, whether it's be scenes or moments, because it creates a much better pace. I listen to a lot of film podcasts and film review podcasts specifically. And many people talk about like the length of movies just being longer and longer. And I also see that with books. Like, when I look at some of the great classics, they're like 200 pages. Now, most books are like 400 plus pages as like a starter. And it's just so interesting to me because, as an artist, you want the maximum impact in the shortest amount of words, right? And we've sort of gotten away from that. And, I think part of it could be like we're just trying to output more and more just to get it out there because of the pressures of the market. Part of it could be, not learning the craft enough, not having the confidence, not trusting of audiences that they'll get it if we take something out. Like it very, very much is interesting to me, but I think we need to get back to brevity as artists. And that's, why for me, I remember having a meeting with a potential investor not too long ago for this new project, and we were talking about my past projects, and he was like, just about the process, and it essentially came up of that I edit my own movies, and I could tell where this was going, and I was like, no, I'm not like I am unafraid to essentially kill off darlings if it makes the project overall better, and so I'm very I get notes, I listen to notes, and I implement those notes. Like, I'm not precious about it, like, this audacious auteur of like, no, you can't just, this is my vision, and no, this is how it's going to be. And he was like, okay, yeah, cool, I like that. Because I knew that was the crux of where this was headed. Because a lot of like indie artists kind of operate in that way. And I think it's, unfortunately, exploded into the mainstream of all of it. And yeah, we should strive. Like, a lot of times I see a 3-hour movie and I'm like, this literally could have been 2 hours. Could have been 2 hours. There's no, and it would have been so much better. Movies that are 2 hours could have been 90 minutes. It's always very interesting to me, but like, we get so precious about it. And it's like, please stop. Like, that old adage of, destruction brings creation. Like, we have to get rid of some, like, when you take away stuff, it makes the message that's there all the more powerful. And yes, the Lord of the Rings, the theatrical versions, basically each of them is about 3 hours. Sure, Lord of the Rings is like 320, but overall, it condensed a lot. And, when you really look at it, like, that thing flies and has a pace to it. And that's what makes it so enjoyable. And that's what made me really fall in love with those movies again, for that specific reason, which was so great because, after having watched the extended editions, I wasn't really on board. But man, the theatrical versions were just so much better. And it got me thinking about this fact of why. Well, because brevity, So anyway, there's that. I also want to talk about, real quick before I get into some other stuff, I have my Patreon page, patreon.com/PhilSvitek. That's a way to support the work that I do. There's only one tier. It's $10 a month, so everyone gets everything all the same. I didn't want to have different tiers and some people to feel left out and so forth. I share like various behind the scenes stuff there. Also, I do a monthly like Q&A, so we can do much more interactions in that way and have more direct context. So that's kind of what I'm trying to develop and build with that. So, feel free to check that out if that tickles your fancy. And Patreon's adding this thing where you can do a trial version. So once that becomes fully available, I'm going to utilize that and allow you essentially, get like a month for free, let's say, so you can see what it's all about. Thank you for even considering it, though. It does mean a lot to me that you even just take the time for this free content to listen. Hope it does. My goal is always to benefit you in the best of ways. Also, too, I talked about a lot of, during this holiday season, and stuff like that, how it's just been busy, and which is why it's always great, like, when people out of nowhere, like, there's this idea, right? It's in this book called A Course in Miracles, but it's also in, just a lot of spiritual books, let's say, this idea that miracles happen all the time around us. We're just too blind to see them. And what's been interesting, in the moments of, I don't know, I'll just conflate it and say despair and darkness and so forth. There's been amazing people that have unexpectedly been a pick-me-up, we were just able to connect and, chat and so forth. And through doing that, it's not that anyone went above and beyond and did anything ultimately special, but in those moments, it was just the light and the energy that they brought that I needed, it was just really cool in that aspect, part of me wants to shout them out because it's a great thing, right? And it's also goes along with my goal of good gossiping, meaning good, we tend to gossip and it tends to be negative about people, but good gossiping is highlighting the good aspects of any one particular person or persons. But also, I know some of the stuff is a little bit more private, and so I don't want to besmirch that. So I'm this middle ground. So I'm just going to be safe and not kind of mention their names. But yeah, it was kind of a slew of people that just unexpectedly, and again, a few of them wouldn't even necessarily know how much of a pick-me-up they were for me. But I think it just goes to show the impact we can have on one another, and I've certainly been on the other side of it. In particular, I'll use this kind of example from Will Smith, which I know some people are hit or miss on Will Smith, especially after the slap. But listen. We all have good actions that we take, and we have bad actions that we take. That wasn't a good action on his part, but this aspect of it, whenever he interacts with his fans, he has this philosophy. For him, it's only 5 seconds, and he'll move on with his day. And as much as he will want to cherish that moment, he won't be able to, right? But for that one person, that 5-second interaction, they will carry with them for a lifetime. And so he puts in his entire presence into that 5 seconds to make sure that they are seen and heard and respected, and so forth. And, I think the good aspect and the thing that each of these people had in common was that idea of just showing respect, being present in the moment, and so forth. And so when we talk about, kind of tying it back to one of the first things that I said, the real goal of self-help being so we can heal others, right? They were in a state of joy and confidence. And because of that, it just translated in such a way where it was a pick-me-up. And for me, even in various moments where I didn't think I had an impact, I know I've had because people have told me so. And I'm like, really? I don't... and sometimes it's not that I necessarily tell them that, but it's many times I don't even remember doing that. To me, that was just essentially a throwaway of well, of course, that was just the right thing to do. But it meant so much to them. And that's what's so beautiful about this world. And if we can just, have that sort of empathy and humanity for each other, then it starts to heal the collective. And we don't even know the depth, the width of what we're capable of at any one moment, which is why I'm so stringent on this idea. Forget about the length of life. We talk about the length of life, how long someone will live. Let's talk about the width of life, and this is how we get there. Is just recognizing and as David Foster Wallace says, the true kind of freedom is being able to be there for other people in a myriad of unsexy and petty ways every single day. That is real freedom, and that's why. That's when we talk about pain and the purpose. That's what I'm talking about. So anyway, two kind of more things that I want to highlight. It was funny. So few artists kind of get to the point. Execution. Everyone has an idea, but execution is the hard part. And that's why when people do execute, regardless of the result, I'm so congratulatory because I know what it means. And I was talking with a friend who's also at like the tail end of like just finally being done with this movie. Because you like, regardless of whatever artistic project it is, I'm going to be talking about filmmaking, but it applies to books, it applies to music, it applies to, poetry and painting and yada, 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 right? But this idea, so with a movie, you think like, as an indie filmmaker that you shoot the movie, you edit the movie, and then that's kind of it. You submit it to festivals and yada, yada. Like the last phase of it just feels like there's always one more task that you have to complete. And I was talking about with my friend Edgar, who's the sound designer on this movie and one of my best friends. We were just saying like, listen, I'm at the phase with this movie because we had to do like kind of technical fixes to it, right? Like whatever, just getting the audio to a level specific for, the various platforms, because every platform has a different specification. And I was like, listen, let's just get this done, because, and I was like, I know you're at this phase too of like, I never want to open up the editing software to export out this movie again. Like, I am so done with this. All I want to do is now, be invited to interviews to talk about it, come to a screening and enjoy it with people. And like, that's it. Like, but creatively, I am done with this movie and wanted to move on. And he was joking, like, he's like, yeah, this movie, it needs to move out and get its own apartment. And that's what it often feels like. But you have to just get to that finish line, which seemingly, that's kind of what breaks a lot of artists, unfortunately, is that finish line is far away. Oftentimes, like there's so many little specifications that you need to go through. As I said, in all of these things, whether it is painting, like the painting side, you can consider of like art gallery stuff and, selling it online or whatever the case may be, right? Music can be like mastering it and putting up on various places, like, and marketing and so forth. Like, it just always seems like there's another step to this damn project. And when it's like, you're just so ready to move on, but you have to go through those steps. And so I said, with my friend Edgar, I was like, listen, let's just do it. Like, let's just get it done, have it off the table. And then that's it. Like, then moving forward, yes, it'll just be interviews and screenings and just the enjoyable stuff, but never again will you have to open up, Pro Tools, and I'm not doing, like, that's it, we're done. So, just, it's good to be at that final stage. The final thing I want to talk about that isn't really related to me, but I draw inspiration from, and I think I want to share because I think it's beneficial to people. So I have this friend named Stefan Wallace, amazing guy, and not only is he an amazing commercial actor, but he has a big heart and has always done a lot for charity. So I've known him so many years at this point, probably like 10, maybe more, and ever since I've known him, he always has been delivering food to homeless people at Skid Row. And, even when he had like nothing, like he was always putting his heart and soul into this, and it just built and built and built. Now he's partnered with Target to be able to do this. And like, I'm so proud of him for doing that, right? Again, talk about like the idea of healing others and just, slow and consistent building into something large. But the most beautiful aspect to me is he has this beautiful young daughter, and he's like integrated her into his way of life as far as this. And that to me is like such a beautiful thing of just instilling good values into kids, like for example, they bag now with Target, like they're able to do a lot more. And so they bag like toothpaste and toothbrushes and, she's right there, putting the stuff into the little bags, and it's just so beautiful. And she's so joyous and happy to do it, and I think that's awesome, so I'm really inspired by that. And for whatever it's worth, if you have kids and stuff like that, just integrating, making them a part of these things that you want to instill, and showing the benefit of all of it. I think there's no better way. Also, just one final thing, if you are a parent, so I am a board member on this nonprofit called Financially Fit Foundation. And one of the things through the foundation that I learned was that there's this thing called Plan 529. And it's essentially a college savings tool that allows you to save money without having to pay taxes. And most families don't know about it. And so I wanted to kind of, I don't know too much about it because I don't have kids, and haven't, again, when I talk about like just in time versus just in case knowledge, right now I know this bit of information, but because I don't need it, it's not a just in time thing for me quite yet. But I wanted to share it because like it's a legitimate program and you can look into it, and I think it could be a benefit. So just want to kind of share that. I know this has been a lengthy episode, but I appreciate you. I haven't really done too many of these just because, again, I've been kind of busy and stuff like that, and so I kind of don't want to make up for lost time in that way. So thank you for sticking with me, and hope you got something out of it. As always, please share your thoughts and questions down below, or suggestions for future episodes, stuff you want answered. I'd love to kind of address that. Anyway, thank you so much. Truly do appreciate you. I'll see you next time.